Hi everyone, this is Bree Rasidlo and I am doing Noreen Garman's reflective practice model. So it begins by discussing what the modern rationale of her reasoning is behind creating this model. When she first discusses what people used to think, we used to teach based on problematic and dual assumptions of uncertainty and deliberation as a basis for action. So kind of just thinking on our own and doing what we've, trained to do kind of almost subconsciously. So there's no really clear definition of knowledge and where it comes from or how it's used. The new rationale that she suggests is that an educator must be responsible for shaping their own rationale through self-understanding and inquiry, and actions must make sense within everyday events while contributing to professional community that one represents. So what we're doing has to have a lot of reasoning behind it. We need to be able to analyze those thoughts and do that efficiently so that when we do share with other coworkers or colleagues, we have a basis and understanding for why we're doing what we're doing and seeing if that's how our other professionals in our community are doing the same thing. So, two procedures of reflection. She discusses reflection on action and reflection through recollection, and says that reflection is actually the heart of clinical supervision. Before she gets into that, she discusses what actually is the basis of knowledge. So, before she states her three versions of what a practitioner's knowledge should be, she does make a point that Morris Kogan, who is another individual on supervision, states that teachers are not sole creators of knowledge, but need to use research in a community of learners. So if we are going to be professionals, we actually have to use our research efficiently, but not in a sense that we have to create it on our own as such as somebody who is, doing like doctoral work at the collegiate level. She discusses the difference between scientific knowledge and professional knowledge, stating that scientific knowledge is basically we know what we know and that's it. Versus professional knowledge is testing and hypothesizing and using information that we are going to continually change and analyze to better our teaching. She also references that, we are in a community of scholars that are bound by traditions and methods of reasoning. Therefore, that information has to be shared with our group of individuals that we are involved with. So the three major sources of the practitioner's knowledge are defined as mythic knowledge. So that is when a person decides to become a professional. So the first instant you decided you were going to become a teacher, you have this set idea in your head of what that means. What does a teacher look like? What does a teacher do? And on top of that, part of that meaning comes from our core belief of what a teacher should be. So she says, start thinking about, Buddha or Gandhi. What does the ultimate teacher look like? What do they do? What are some actions that they do that, has an effect on society? And that has the most core influential basis for what we end up doing as teachers. The second type of knowledge is called craft knowledge. So this is trial and error learning. So we're doing a good job as teachers, but we don't really have a lot of rationale to back us up. Like, well, I know this works, but I don't know why it works. So that means taking our actions then and characterizing them as activities and methods. So this is specifically what I do in my room. Yes, I know it works, but the end result of that is you can't really analyze that and you don't have any method of improving. So the third basis of knowledge, which is the most important, is inquiry. And that is the process of discovery, verification, explanation, interpretation, and evaluating through reliving experiences vicariously, and we will dig more into that now. So she starts saying that in order to get to that inquiry knowledge state, we use the reflection approach. So planning, acting, reflecting, and evaluating. It is not meant for a mental reexamination of past events aimed at justifying our actions. So constantly like saying, oh, well, I did this because of this, this, and this. It's not the reason. And it's not meant to defend the consequences of those actions. So if a student doesn't learn something, you're not supposed to continually mentally go over the negative of, the student not learning. Also, it is not for thinking about what should have been done. You can't change the past. What is. We just want to look at the data, see why it happened, and figure out how we can better the next situation. So reflection on action has 5 steps to it. The first one is involvement in a scenario. So a piece of action with a history and a future, selected events are set aside. So basically an observation or setting up a time for a walkthrough. Number 2 is record the scenario. So collecting stable data, which is data that one or more people can use. It's not from one person's biased opinion or from one person's perspective. So this can mean recording the lesson as compared to an observer's notes. And observer's notes are considered kind of unstable data. So when you record the lesson and sit down with your supervisor, then not only is the teacher seeing what their actions were, but the supervisor is able to go back and re-acknowledge exactly what was happening if they couldn't write things down 100% clear in the observation themselves. 3, we take the meaning of that data. So using that inquiry knowledge process that we mentioned earlier, which is discovery, verification, explanation, interpretation, and evaluation, to analyze for patterns and insights. Other sources should be used to help with interpretation. So this is bringing in work of past authors based on educational theories to analyze your own teaching and kind of come up with why your data is resulting in the way that it is. And that immediately leads into number 4, which is the educational control, which tells us that the events and meetings are put into a manageable form. So giving us an insight for future use. What can I do in the future to, better my education, or what can I do to even take the students further if they did well? And then finally, number 5 is the confirmation. So does it have meaning to others? Has it already been written about? And how can I share that with my colleagues and coworkers to help them in our community of learners in our professional environment? The second way she recommends to reflect is through recollection. So first step is to recall. So digging through your memory of past events, and accuracy is actually not a factor in this situation. She actually describes this as being elusive and less precise, and it's subject to a much wider interpretation because emotions are involved in recalling those events. Number 2 is coming up with some type of form of representation of that event. So capturing it in some way, whether that's written. And she also says, that could even be like a painting or music or even something as simple as an audio recording. Once you have the capturing of the event, you lead into that interpretation again, just like the reflection on action. So, what does the expression of these events mean? So, why are you detailing, why are you thinking specifically about those events comparatively to maybe other situations in your teaching career? What has been discovered by capturing that event? So, have you noticed something that, maybe you didn't think specifically about before while it was happening, but now you're thinking about it as you're recollecting that memory? And is there anything really hidden in that memory? And finally, that leads to confirmation. So, does the interpretation make sense beyond somebody's own or your own beliefs? In what ways is it useful? And this can be used with a supervisor. So, sitting down saying, is my interpretation of what specifically happened here making sense? You can also compare that to other writings in the field, comparing it to scholarly works to see if your logic is actually lining up with current studies. And this can be used as a major tool for professional development. So Garman actually references this in her article writing that this is a really great tool for development to have educators sit down and maybe write a journal and, just kind of record like for 3 or 4 days, what goes on in the classroom, things that are positive, things that are negatives, and then sitting down and discussing that with your coworkers and seeing if the same things are occurring in other classrooms as are yours. So taking this process as a supervisor, it becomes a collaborative approach. It is not extremely directive and it is not 100% teacher driven, although reflection through recollection can be teacher driven if a teacher chooses to do that on their own, not as a form of evaluation. The first step of this would be involvement. So agreeing on the amount of involvement the supervisor is going to have in the classroom. So what kind of records are taken and how to deal with that data. Second is the actual observation. The supervisor collecting stable data. So is the supervisor going to take a video, or are they going to 100%, worry about their own notes? And she also states that the teacher should be responsible too in deciding on how that data is collected. So if a teacher wants to, they should have the right to record a video as well and compare that with the notes of the supervisor. Finally, sitting down with your supervisor and analyzing and interpreting what the results are. So suggesting ways to make that data meaningful, not just looking at it as positives and negatives. How are we going beyond that scope? Guiding that teacher to the inquiry process is the supervisor's job. 4 is the construal, again, going through these steps that are reflection on action. Supervisor is supposed to guide the teacher to put results into a useful form, so helping them figure out what that insight is and how that can improve their teaching in the future. And then finally, confirming that result. So looking into scholarly works, seeing if what the teacher is having in the classroom is comparing to current findings in the field. Finally, to connect this to an adult learning theory, Garman's theory most likely connects to holistic adult learning. She actually references holistic adult learning in her writing. And embedded knowing, which is discussed in our textbook, is comparable to craft knowledge. So embedded knowing is actually referenced as that, excuse me, is actually referenced as that kind of automatic knowledge that you just do, which is the same as craft knowledge. It's that, trial and error process that we use as like first year, second year teachers to kind of get into the field. Secondly, narrative learning is also in the holistic adult learning approach, and it's connected to the process of reflection on action and reflection through recollection by using journals and written notes to process. And then Garman also acknowledges the impact of emotions when using reflection through recollection by stating that it can be elusive and less precise. So, holistic learning is all about actually taking those emotions and implementing them into our practice. Here, Garman actually says that it's kind of a negative. And that is it. Hope you guys got most of what her entire theory about reflection is for practice. And if you guys have any questions, please feel free to comment below. All right. Thanks, guys.